Hello, everyone. It's Shane Kanto, your Wasteland reviewer, and welcome to Wasteland Talks, my weekly talk show where I talk about whatever the hell I want. And this is a new edition of my segment, Song Maketh the Scene. So, we're going to be talking about a song and how it fits into a particular scene in a movie and why it works so well. And joining me is my buddy, Rowan. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hola, of course. Lovely, lovely to be here as always, Shane.
Rowan and I were co-hosts of our own podcast together, and obviously have collaborated a lot over the last few years through Sif Pop and stuff like that. And got to see some movies together in real
Exactly.
life
Yeah.
in New York City and stuff. But here, I specifically asked you, Rowan, to come on to this because I know you're one of the biggest fans of the Watchmen film that I know. Because seems to be a bit of a polarizing film. I know there's a lot of people that really hate this movie, and also some people that think this is one of Zack Snyder's best. That would be me and Rowan, so it works
Yes.
out that way. But we're going to be specifically talking about the opening credits sequence with The Times Are A-Changin' by Bob Dylan that go along with it. But Rowan, just generally, what's your experience with the Watchmen film?
I don't remember when I first saw it, but I've seen, I think, every cut that exists. The director's cut's the best one, by the way. And I just so I read the graphic novel. My dad's really into comics, and so I read the graphic novel when I was not too young, but like younger.
Mhm.
And then I watched the movie and I was just blown away by how well it translated the graphic novel, which is like very particular in terms of its style sensibilities
Yep.
to the screen. And yeah, I just really, really like the movie. It's really well done. And like I said, evokes the feeling of reading the comic book, which is something that's like very rare because usually people aren't tr like directors aren't trying to adapt
Mhm.
work like this with such a one-to-one ratio. And I think Snyder does that incredibly well. And so I feel like if people don't like the movie, they either they just don't like the story of the graphic novel, or they just don't really like Zack Snyder's style. I don't really think that is a quality judgment on Watchmen overall. Um, which is I mean, hot take, one of the greatest graphic novels ever written.
Yep.
I don't think I'm going against any grain by saying that. But yeah, I have seen this movie many, many times, and this is like the scene we're going to talk about today is like maybe one of the best, not even my favorite, just like best opening credits of all time,
Mhm.
and I think it really fits in. And it's something that the graphic novel doesn't do, which I think is important to say, is that
Mhm.
it's different from how the graphic novel presents this time period shift in this montage. But I'll turn it back over to you before we get into that.
I do feel like I know there's some frustration among fans of the graphic novel where some of the characters feel a little bit more superhero-y in this than like they're just supposed to be people.
Yeah.
Like there's only a few of the characters that have any actual powers in the graphic novel. And then I know they made one humongous change with what you know obviously we're not here to talk about the whole entire film, but I feel like there's one major change that they made in the film which honestly I think kind of makes a lot of sense in terms of the climax of the movie versus like a graphic novel. But in terms of how what Ozymandias winds up using to cause destruction, I think makes a lot of sense in the movie because I know that's a big change. But like my experience with the film, I distinctly remember buying this movie because when I went away to college in 2010, I went to the Ryder bookstore and they had used DVDs. And I bought like there was a few of them that I bought like Rise of Cobra, the G.I. Joe movie. I bought this on DVD and watched this for the first time, and I thought it was really awesome. And I know I've read the graphic novel, love the graphic novel. I think this is one of Zack Snyder's best films. And that miniseries that they made for HBO that spun off of this wild and
Mhm.
a really impressive, very interesting sequel to this story for sure. But this film feels very special, and it does feel like it's ripped right out of the panels of the graphic novel in many ways visually. And obviously, the other side of this conversation is Dylan, who wrote the song for this sequence. So, Rowan, what's your background with Bob Dylan's music?
Honestly, I don't really have a background with his
Which is
music.
fair.
Most of the Bob Dylan I've listened to was post Complete Unknown. And like, I knew his most famous stuff, but that was kind of it. Like my
Yeah.
dad, like my parents played me the Beatles and like Al Stewart, like not like a lot of Bob Dylan's contemporaries, but never really him. And so most of the Dylan awareness I had was culturally and not necessarily specifically.
I know I have listened to classic rock music my whole entire life. Um, Honestly, most of the music I still listen to now is from the 60s, 70s, and a little bit
Mhm.
into the 80s. But my brother is a humongous Bob Dylan fan, and he used to listen to Essential Bob Dylan, that series of greatest hits CDs and albums that came out for a whole bunch of artists, which they had like 30 something songs on them. And so, like, I heard a lot of Bob Dylan growing up. Bob Dylan was not really my cup of tea growing up there. And he's still not like, I'm not the biggest folk music kind of person, but like, I enjoy good folk music. I enjoy good music. So like, I know some of his songs, like one of my brother's favorites is Hurricane, and I think that's an excellent song. And this, I think, is so impactful and specific because this really matches the time and the era of what this is showing in this film because the actual story is 80s and, Richard Nixon and his endless presidential regime in the graphic novel and everything. But I think Bob Dylan's really fitting for this time period, especially. And this film utilizes, well, I know utilizes some Leonard Cohen in a very interesting way. In terms of
Yeah.
Hallelujah. Um, Obviously like Jimi Hendrix and stuff like that. But this film, The Times Are A-Changin', I feel like fits so well with this sequence because it's literally in the title. And Bob Dylan really was writing a song about the changing tide in terms of counterculture and how things were changing in the 1960s and America was changing. And for this song to be leveraged to show the changing of like the Minutemen into the Watchmen and how society's outlook on heroes, like superheroes, really changed. And I think that's really impactful. But I guess, Rowan, what makes this song and this opening credit sequence stand out to you?
Well, first, I will say I think it's the best thing Zack Snyder has ever shot because he tends to be either very action oriented or very talky and like hinges
Mhm,
upon narration a lot. And this is like pretty perfect show don't tell storytelling, which he is
mhm,
not historically very great at. And it's also, you mentioned this song being used as, like both the literal, times they are a changing, but also like it's the time period we're seeing spans essentially all of superhero storytelling from the
mhm.
beginning of, comic books to like in relation to our world, the beginning of comic books and when the story takes place, and pretty much like brings us along that path, imagining what our world would look like with superheroes or heroes or vigilantes within that. And like, there are a lot of familiar clips, Neil Armstrong walking on the moon, JFK's assassination, the famous kiss in New York after the war ends, except they are just slight variations because it's different because they're like this is a world where superheroes and vigilantes exist, and that world is going to be different from ours. But the way that the song and the montage is laid out, it seems that our world has always been heading towards the darkness
Hmm.
of the 70s and the 80s. And that was just like and that was kind of unavoidable, despite the fact that in this world there are heroes to theoretically improve the world and make things better. But this this song hypothesizes that it's inevitable, that we are
Hmm.
always going to get ourselves into this particular place, and it doesn't really matter what happens, we're all going to get to this collective consciousness and state of mind. And it's not going to be great, really, for anyone, despite the fact that, the 60s are remembered as this, like, incredibly, like there's enough space in between since World War II, and there's hippies, and the mood is remembered as being happier and more upbeat. But that's when we got into like Vietnam, and like that's
Hmm.
when, there was so much bad stuff happening in the world that really became apparent in the 70s, but we were ignoring it in the 60s. And I think that this montage reflects that incredibly well, using not just the the song but sound design as well to
Hmm.
really viscerally communicate like everything that we need to know, like gunshots, like stray lines of dialogue, screams, like it's really like not happy at all. And I just think it's a really incredible piece of filmmaking that we don't really talk about enough. And Watchmen was on HBO the other day, and as I turned on HBO Max, and I hoped that it was near the beginning so that I could catch this opening,
Hmm.
and I did. And it's just like it functions individually as like a short film,
Yeah.
really. Um, introducing us to so many characters, because the opening, I think, the opening of the movie is the comedian's murder, right? And
Yes.
then it launches into this, and you are introduced to every single character, like important character of the movie, and what has led to their creation and
Hmm.
origin within this montage. And it's just it's trying to do so much, and I think it does all of it like really, really well. Yeah, so like maybe, maybe a fluke in the Snyder, machine, but like one that I will always enjoy watching. And it's so visually, like the visuals have always been what Snyder is
Yeah.
great at, even if there's like so much dialogue over it. And this is for me like the peak of that filmmaking style.
And as you point out, there's a lot of layers to this. And going even back earlier to something that you said, that this is not part of the graphic novel. But
Hmm.
what's so fascinating, it feels like it's ripped right from a graphic novel because these
Exactly.
all feel like panes that could just be on a couple of pages, really setting the stage. And I feel like that comes into motion so perfectly on screen. And yes, this is a lot also. Don't know. And to your point, it's not Zack Snyder's strongest suit in terms of storytelling. And that's why this feels so different and so impactful. Obviously, it has like the slow-mo and all that kind of like stylized visuals. And even just the tempo of the song, I think, is really fitting. This is a somber experience leading into this. And you start off with a very brutal murder, like
Hmm.
very brutal. And then to your point, this hits on some key elements of our history. It's like, yeah, we made it to the moon. Dr. Manhattan was already there.
Hmm.
Um, you have JFK being assassinated by the comedian, and all of these things that kind of shatter this. Hey, these are heroes. Comedian's not a hero. Comedian does a lot of bad things,
Yeah.
and so do a lot of these characters. And they're very flawed individuals. And like obviously Rorschach is very violent vigilante and who has a very specific code. But like this whole opening sequence shows, you know, an openly lesbian superhero being brutally murdered with a sexual partner. And like that's so impactful. And then you see another hero being pulled off to an asylum because they're insane. And all of these things, it just deconstructs the idea of heroes. And that's so impactful because it's so important to set the stage for where society is during this film. Because superheroes are not welcome at this point, and it takes some getting back into their suits or those coming out of the shadows that propel this story forward. And this opening sequence sets that stage so perfectly. And just from the societal elements, the 1950s were the perfect time in America, which they really weren't, but outwardly, that's what was. So that was what's seen by everybody. Obviously, there was a darkness in those suburbs and all of those things, but like as a whole, America was pretty happy in the 50s. The 60s was where the tumultuous times began. Vietnam and assassinations of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King Jr. and all of those things that just tore our society apart. And to your point, by the time the 70s rolled around, it was a hardened time. And it's interesting because you see that context in film, because the 50s were like a very specific time of film. You had the studio musicals, still the religious historical epics, and all those kinds of things. The 60s is where things started really changing. And then the 70s were a very brutal time in terms of film, in terms of how it portrayed life. And all of those things really come together in such a layered way, reflected in this opening credit sequence. And I really don't think Zack Snyder can top this.
Yeah.
Honestly, like he had a lot of creative mojo going when he came up with the idea of this opening credit sequence, and it's so awesome. Every single frame is gorgeous and perfectly shot, and the colors just vibrant. And this song really just ties it all together because this was an anthem. And I know they highlight that in A Complete Unknown that this song was a big anthem for the times changing in America. And it's reflected here. And Zack Snyder and his music supervisor did a great job of finding like that perfect song to go along with this.
Yeah. Like honestly, looking back on it, it's like going through our history, and it even starts to get worse near the end than what really happened with us. Like, um,
Mhm.
there's a scene which is like feels like kind of out of place when you think about like what they would have had to shoot because like they shot all of this. And this is already
Mhm.
in a movie that's like the ultimate cut is like 3.5 hours long. So they shot a
Yeah.
lot for it. But like Castro and Brezhnev in the Soviet Union with like the nuclear weapons going by and planes flying overhead, like that's happening in this universe like
Mhm.
very explicitly. And the take on the flower power photo with the protesters, the little girl putting the,
Oh,
putting the flower in the gun and then the gun's actually going off, which is like so like, clearly this is a world that is not as sympathetic and is much more hardened when it comes to these, like I think Nixon is on his like fifth term or something by the
I was
time that
about to say, this is the
yeah,
kind of world where Richard Nixon's been president for like almost 20 years.
exactly. Yeah. It's like it's sort of this opening sort of eases us into the fact that yes, it's like our world, but it's also very much, it starts off with that very idealized like 1940s, like the superheroes are the face of the war and like everything's going great, and then it eases us back to where we're going, like I said before, and then it gets even worse, sort of through that tunnel that it's bringing us through. And yeah, just what a phenomenal opening. Like nothing quite like it. It's hard like even like the um the movie itself. Like I think this might be one of the best scenes in the movie and it's a movie that I
Mm,
love. But
yeah.
like it starts off with such a strong like statement that it's really hard for the movie to get back to that point as well.
And I'm going to read just the opening lyrics of this song because I feel like it really encapsulates what's going on at this moment. Come gather around people wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown. Accept it that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. If your time to you is worth saving, you better start swimming, or you'll sink like a stone, for the times are changing. This idea that society is turning and the flood waters are rising and there is crisis and danger in front of you because things are getting bad. This isn't a hopeful song about like times are changing, we have something shiny around the corner. No, this is things are getting bad and you need to do something about it. And I think that works so perfectly with this sequence because yes, as you pointed out, life becomes worse and worse and worse throughout this montage, setting up that this is not a great world that the Watchmen takes place in, and it's kind of nightmarish. And obviously, it really sets the stage for all of these different characters who have different perspectives on how to fix the world. Even
Exactly.
our antagonist and the lengths that everyone will go. And that's what makes this film so fascinating. And I don't like this film works so well because this perfect setup really just sets the whole stage for what comes after it. But I guess, Rowan, do you have any other thoughts that you wanted to throw out?
Bob Dylan, I don't know, might be a hot take. The guy can write a song. Pretty good.
he, he might have a very interesting and unique voice for sure, but could he write some lyrics for
Honestly,
sure?
I feel like that even adds to it. If his voice is perfectly beautiful and like pristine, I feel like it doesn't have the same bite that a song like this does.
Well, Rowan, the quote, the complete unknown. You either got to be beautiful or ugly. You just can't be boring.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's the thing. As a singer, too, he might have been literally talking about his looks, but like if you're thinking about voice, you're not going to become a famous singer unless you have an immaculate voice that stands out against people or you have a voice that's interesting.
Mm,
And
yeah.
speaking from a AC/DC fan, that's definitely the interesting part that makes them stand out. It's not the great singing part,
Yeah, exactly.
but that's Bob Dylan
It's
and what
Bob Dylan.
made him a star and an artist that has spoken to people for generations and generations, and to the point where he's still influential enough where James Mangold made a biopic about him last year. So there you go. But
Jeez.
yes,
Yeah.
this is such a fascinating opening. And if you haven't even just watched this opening, to Rowan's point, this feels like a short film all on its own, and it really
Yeah.
functions so perfectly. So check it out. Or if you're feeling adventurous, check out all of Watchmen. See how you feel. Check out the graphic novel and
Yeah.
while you're at it. But Rowan, thank you so much for coming on and talking movies with me.
Shane, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure as always.
And thank all of you out there for always tuning in and supporting your Wasteland Reviewer.